So I'll take about 2 minutes to briefly go through the 6 topic areas that you'll have to choose from and how assessment works. So I'm just going to do a light treatise on this, but if you want more details, just come up to me and we'll talk about it. So we have mindset, the idea that you can learn and grow and that you're not basically fixed in stone with your abilities. The outcomes associated with that are academic motivation, success, college acceptance and completion rates. We have conformity. That's the automatic tendency to go with your perception of what the group wants so that you'll fit in or so that you'll have good information. And that causes all kinds of problems when the entire group is automatically acting through conformity. You can think of any number of situations where automatic conformity causes problems. The bystander effect, the tendency not to get involved and help somebody out when there's a large crowd around, has some obvious applications. Kids both don't want to be in a situation where they're not getting help, and they also don't want to automatically not help the people around them. We have stereotype threat and other barriers to academic learning. The idea here is that there are certain psychological things in place in a classroom which can selectively disadvantage certain kids, and we teach them to be aware of it and to counter the effects of it. We have a more general stereotyping and prejudice and bullying lesson, which is really about how groups work, your automatic tendency to group the world around you and to treat those groups that you're not even aware necessarily that you formed with certain kinds of preferential and prejudiced treatment. And the idea is that a lot of the time when you're aware that you're selectively treating people in certain ways, you don't want to. So again, we're not teaching people necessarily how to go and remove all racism in the world. We're teaching them how to understand their own tendencies to take a step in that direction and to decide whether or not they want to work on it. Situation blindness is the idea that we are deeply impacted by the groups and the people around us, and we're not aware of the direction a lot of the time that pushes us. So the idea is that once you're aware that, you really are a part of a group and that group affects you and the people around you affect you and that you're unconsciously affecting them, that you can be a more active participant in that process. So it's a more superordinate category. All of the other ones to some extent fall in it. But it's really important when you start to make assumptions about other people. When you assume that somebody did this because of who they are and not what was going on, that's the kind of problem we deal with in that lesson. Now,
before Brian goes into assessment, I just want to punctuate. It was interesting that last one, situation blindness, is the one that we were trying to pull up. We're so hardwired to essentially organize and understand the world through character, personality, individuals, that we have to remind ourselves repeatedly to stand back and understand what's hidden in plain view, the power of situations.
Well said. So just a little bit about assessment, and this is a deep topic that has many levels to it. But in the most general level, there are 3 kinds of assessment that are possible, and you'll have the opportunity to do 2 of them. The first kind of assessment is traditional kind of informal feedback, talking to the students, talking to the teachers. What did you learn? What did you like? Did it work for you? Basic general feedback about your teaching and about the information. That's actually optional. Like, we encourage you to do a little bit of that just so you can get the feedback and learn from it. But it's not the most interesting way to assess data. Before I get into the second way, which is the most interesting, I'll also talk about the third way, which is tying the results directly to long-term hard outcomes. Obviously, you guys are not going to be needing to worry about this going into a single-shot engagement. But, in a perfect world, it's nice to know if a year later the kids you worked with are somehow doing better. Now, the area where you will be doing the most assessment is in traditional psychological surveys. And we actually have 3 types of psychological surveys, or 3 broad categories. They're all topical. But we have surveys which have already been used in educational environments with students of that age, and those surveys have been tied directly to outcomes. For example, Carol Dweck's 8-item mindset survey has been tied directly to student outcomes. So if you get a shift on that scale, even without being able to track the longitudinal data, you can feel pretty good that you made a long-term difference in a student. Now, we also have some scales that were developed by psychologists that are grounded in theory, but there hasn't been as much experimentation done with these specific scales yet. So, for example, Carol Dweck's intelligence mindset scale is lots and lots and lots of work, but she also has a scale about just people in general. Do you think people can change basic characteristics of themselves? Can they change their personality? We think it's a really relevant scale to the kind of research we're doing, but you don't see as much good research done with it. So you'll get the chance to see what we can connect to some of these great scales. Now, the third category of assessment scales are ones that we developed in-house to try to track our own unique constructs. So our conformity scale, our bystander effect scale, those are new. And what that means is that there's a lot of work to do some scale development there. So you'll get an opportunity to decide which of these assessments is most relevant to the intervention you're conducting. You'll get to decide how much you want to stick with traditional metrics, how, to some extent, and I'll work with you, each group about this, how far you want to go into some of these experimental measures, and then also, how much direct feedback about your teaching performance do you want? So does that answer does anybody have any questions about assessment?
Why don't I, you stay with the mic.
So basically, I want to know, are we going to do anything as far as measuring like behavioral outcomes? Like, I know that's very difficult to do in this sort of situation, but it seems like it might be the most important kind of data that you could actually get.
Yes, that's a great question. And the short answer is the easiest way that you will have to try to get some behavioral feedback is by interviewing the partner teacher that you're working with. They see those students on a regular basis. They know what they were like before you got there. They can see the change that you've kind of made. So actually directly observing behavior in doing assessment in psychological interventions is actually a very tricky thing in and of itself. The only other way to do that is to tie it to hard data. For example, like if kids are getting into a lot of trouble and going to a lot of after school kind of things, you can actually track to see if the numbers went down. That's a behavioral type measure. So that being said, if you have a clever way that you would like to attempt to measure behavior, we will work with you on it and we will try it and we'll see what happens. So yes and no. It's not a simple answer.